model view controller is a way of building a web app. Any self-respecting article on MVC will show you a diagram of a controller, view and model, and in a fairly abstract manner, I might say, might describe what the function of each is. Let's just run this app first of all to see what it produces. Eventually the browser will show that it produces a page which has got a welcome plus a bit of data down beneath as well. So let's take a look at the anatomy of that. You have this file here is what we call a model. It really is consisting of classes. It's the way that the data is shaped, shall we say. Now we have in the middle here, the diagram, we have the controller. Now a controller will respond to a URL. So that, for example, in here, if I were to type this in explicitly, then I would come to that page. And by the way, if we were to type in the default index, then that would be find the index page just as well. Actually, that's a mistake here, that we need more than the index, but just it's interesting actually when one does make an error in the URL, it's a bit forgiving and just gives you a blank page. But what I've left out here is the home, which I will explain in a moment. Home and then index. It happens that this is a controller and this is an action. I'll explain that in a moment. So that if I press enter in this situation, it should show me that same welcome page that I found before. So as I mentioned, we have the student class, which is in the model. It's a model for the data, basically. A class is a model for data, how the data is shaped, if you like. And then we have a controller. The controller is what responds to this URL, which I'll explain in detail in a moment. And then we have the view. Now the view is a rendering of the page. So this thing here is what we see. We could regard that as the product of a view. And this is the view. And the view is a combination of C# and HTML. Let's take a look at the controller first of all. The controller, because I type in home, it means it will go to the controller called home controller. That's a convention. You need to get used to that when dealing with these web apps, that C# will go looking, if you type in home, it'll go looking for a thing called home controller, always with the controller. So if you had, for example, home address, then we'll go looking for a controller called home address, and so on. And now what happens? It responds to a get. Now a get is when we type in the URL, and you can see it then returns a view. But before that, we define a student as related, as defined, declared perhaps as a student object, student object here, and we actually produce an object, an instance of it, and then we pass it in the view. Now this passing the view is a way of communicating with this what we call a view. So once again, I have the model, the controller, and then the view. So it's really MCV. The point about all this MVC is it's usually done behind the scenes. So there's no, let's see, we said here S1 is passed by this view method, and it winds up here. And we define our model as being this. Now, as being what? As being this class over here. You can see that the namespace is that models, which is the same as this namespace here. And then you can see the name of the class is student. So this variable, if you like, model, is referring to that particular class. And that's how we reference from one page to another. And now, once we've defined our model object, we can then use it, you see. And we say model ID. Now, model ID represents this field here. Model name represents that property in the class, and model age represents that, which at the moment they have values of 1, ed, and 34. So you can see now that the view will display the ID. So this says here to display in the HTML, using a bit of link where we have a lambda expression here, model mapping into model ID. So basically we've taken the value and rendered it onto the HTML page. So we've got the idea here, which has got a value of 1, and then we've got the name, which has got Ed, and so on. The age is 34. So just to summarize what we've done, we've typed a URL in here, and that's taken over by the controller. And incidentally, you see the controller, that I told you before, that gives you the actual controller file, which is this one here, which has got the word home followed by controller. So that's how, when it calls that, it knows to go to find that particular controller. Now that takes a little bit of getting used to, but that's the way it works. There's a controller is attached to every controller name. Now take a look at the index, because the index, you see, is a method, or an action we call it, a method within the controller. We have an action, and that's what it does. So when you type in a name here, you've got the home, which is the controller name, and then the index is the action. You can see that again. I'll just show you. This is the controller, which was called, and then this was the action, which was called, index action. And you'll notice actually they are default in this particular situation. I can show you how that's configured, but that is the default situation. So if you leave them out, indeed will give you that same page. But what does it do? It produces an object from that student class, and then it calls the view method. Now the view method knows to go looking for another, goes to look for a particular page. In this case, it'll go looking for this index page here, which has got the same name as the name of the action, or the name of the method. So it knows that it ought to go looking for this particular file, the index file, and this will therefore, as I mentioned before, it will render the data to the web page.